Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Magnetic Podcast. I'm your host, Jared, and I have the privilege of welcoming an amazing guest today, Monica Rojas. Monica, thank you so much for being here. Monica is actually the head of a blockchain community out in Miami, as well as a bunch of other things, which I'm excited to talk to her about today. But Monica, thanks for being here. Would love if you could give everybody listening a quick introduction of yourself.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. My name's Monica. I am head of community at Upstream. That's like my 9 to 5 job, but I also run a community in Miami called The Chain. So it's basically a dinner series and a way to connect with other people that are still building in blockchain. And yeah, even like a good way to make friends if you're new to a city and want to meet like-minded people.
That's awesome. I'm excited today specifically because we have yet to have someone on this show, on this podcast that lives and breathes community. So I have so many questions. I think the first thing I want to ask is like, what does community mean to you? Because I feel like everybody has their own opinions on community.
Yeah, and especially now, I feel like the word community is used for so many things. But like the way I see community is creating a space where you're energized and you look forward to meeting these people, but also like a space where you feel like you're creating opportunities for yourself and like you're excited to be there. You're looking forward to it, but also finding ways that could open up more doors. Um, and I just think that in a way, community should be intentional. So we can get into that a little bit later, but just to summarize it, I think community is just like a way to connect with like-minded people and get energized and create opportunities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out to me when I think of community and where maybe people miss, like I think sometimes people think if you throw 100 people in a room, that's a community. And I think under some people's definitions that would be. But I feel like the big thing there is like there's some sort of connection. There's something that ties those people in that room together. And that's where that community is formed, whether it's a shared identity, whether it's a shared love for something, whether it's a historical connection. That's like really where I think community comes from, is that sense of connection. So I love the way you describe that. Can you tell me a little bit about like what do you do in your day to day when it comes to community? What does that look like as far as your role?
Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to. And I like what you said about like just community being a place where it's more than just a room full of like people. It's like kind of like why you're there. Um, and I feel like we still haven't figured that out. Like, what is a community? But going back to like my day to day, I literally like I study community. So for my day job, right now I'm actually building a new product and we're figuring out ways how our existing community can be plugged into or find value from the product we're building. Um, and also, I just finished running a 24-week community. It was actually a DAO. So DAOs are communities with shared wallets. And it was more of like a way to educate people, right? So there's that comes down to like what communities can do for you. So in one part of my work, we're using community to educate. In another part of my work, we're doing it for product development. And then for my 5 to 9, which is the chain, we're using community to connect like-minded people in an intentional way. Um, and on top of that, I'm actually a part of a few communities as well. And yeah, I mean, everything right now, I'm more focused on everything I do has to touch community in a way because that's where I see myself like 10 years from now becoming like the go-to person for community and understanding the science of like bringing people together.
What does that science look like? Can you give us a sneak behind the scenes look at the science of community? Because I hear you say that and that gets me excited. Like, what does that mean to you? What is the science of community?
Yeah, so it's been like a really weird time. I mean, I know you're in crypto and the word NFT community comes out a lot, right? And we sometimes measure the success of communities by the numbers. How many people are part of my community? Okay. So if I have 20,000 people, if we see a community with 20,000 people, we automatically assume that community is successful.
Mm.
But my theory on community is unique, and hey, you can challenge me, but this is what I'm thinking is the future. Um, it's micro communities, right? Because sometimes it's not about walking into like a conference with 3,000 people and not knowing where to start, even though they're all like-minded, but it's about being in a room where you can actually connect with people and you become energized when you're around them, and that can lead to potential partnerships, friendships, um, deal flow, right? So, how do we create these micro niche communities of like minded people and find ways to connect the micro communities in a unique way? So, that's my theory. I'm currently building that out in person. I'm trying it out right now in Miami. So, if this goes well, I'm definitely going to be using this for other industries that I'm passionate about. So, for example, like I'm a huge soccer player. Like I would love to build a community, a micro community of like-minded female soccer players. That way we can get together and talk about how we transitioned our skill sets on the field to our workplace.
That's really interesting. How does that work when you are a maybe a bigger brand and you hear that what you're saying and it resonates? I think it resonates with me especially because I've walked into rooms of
Hmm.
communities where I feel like the furthest thing from a member of the community. How do
Hmm.
you manage that though when you maybe have a brand that has a million customers? How do you foster or facilitate micro communities?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And the best thing I could do to break it down is give an example. But also it's like if we think about it, there's a difference. Community is part of like the marketing funnel. So, for example, we both love Nike, right? We follow them on Instagram or Twitter, and then we also like buy Nike shoes. Are we part of that community, or are we part of that audience funnel? What do you think, Jared?
Audience funnel, at least for me.
Okay, yeah. So So the audience funnel is a little bit bigger, but once you love Nike, you go to Nike events, you support your favorite Nike athletes, and you only buy Nike and you don't buy Adidas, anything Adidas, then you
Mm.
might be moving towards the community part of the funnel. But eventually you'll use community as a way to give your most loyal customers perks, right? So like, for example, if I when I played soccer in college, I was only allowed to wear Nike. If we wore Adidas, we were fined, right? So, like, how do you find ways to create more perks for this audience? But yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody. Like, if we're talking about crypto here, like the perfect example is like how many like board ape holders are actually active in the community and leveraging their brand, right? And the more the most active community members leverage their brand, the more perks they get. So they get added to like the board ape council, or they get like merch, or they get like giveaways, right? So um community is more about creating brand loyalty when it comes to bigger brands.
So for you, it sounds like community is not just a group or segment of people. It's a little bit like I feel like people sometimes think community is further up the funnel, maybe than the way you're describing it, where I sign up for I get a Lululemon product and I give them my
Mhm.
email and I'm instantly in their community. But it sounds like
Mhm.
what you're saying is community is actually maybe a bit further down. So maybe that's like the general audience pool that's interested in Lululemon, but then there's another step to it where it's like, well, now I want, exclusive access to Lululemon. I want to be a part of their story. I want to live Lululemon. I want to talk
Mhm.
Lululemon. That's a different sort of layer to it. Um, would you say that that's one is community, one is not, or would you say it's more of like a tiered system? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think community is defined by the individual and what the brand wants from them, right? So like that's why it's so hard to define community because community is so different for everybody. But it really comes down to you. Like, would you consider yourself part of the Lululemon community because you're part of the newsletter, or would you consider yourself part of the Lululemon community once you attend a group like a in-person event, or maybe become a Lululemon ambassador, right? So it's up to you, and it's also like a brand strategy, right? Like Lululemon knows what they're doing. They've studied the behaviors of their target audience, so they know, okay, like if we give them this opportunity to be seen or like resonate as a community member, they'll naturally start promoting it with their friends. So the brands are studying the behaviors of different people, but honestly, that's why that's what makes community so hard. Like there's no real way to define it, and it's different for every individual.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. I mean, going back to I think the way I described community as connection, or some sort of common link or common thread. If you're thinking about human beings, there could be like two people who love Nike might share completely different threads to each other that
Hmm.
tied them to the brand. So I guess in that sense, it is super difficult to find like one common thread that ties your community together. So maybe it's more about sort of the values and the mission and the story, and then that's sort of that like tying thread, and then people from there have a million different ways that they're connecting with people that share sort of a similar vision, I guess, of who they are, who they want to be.
Yeah, yeah, I love. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
What's so as far as like community building, because it sounds like you're an expert in this, what is some of the coolest like ways that you have fostered community or built community? Really could be any specific example that you can think of.
Yeah, yeah, this is a really good question. I guess I can share like a most recent example. And by the way, I'm definitely not an expert. Like I feel like I learn something new every single day. Especially when you sometimes you think you know what you're doing, and then all of a sudden it's like your strategy changes completely. Um, so my most recent one, I guess this is a good story to share about the chain Miami. During last year, during like 2022, like May 2022, Miami was known as like the crypto scene according to Twitter and Mayor Suarez and everybody. And my company was really active. My full-time job was really active in hosting in-person events, happy hours, crypto co-working day. And one day I just tweeted just to like see if I could invite a few more people to our events. I tweeted, "Hey, if you're Miami, engage with this tweet. We'll see like what we could do. Like I'll give you access to exclusive dinners, happy hours, different perks." And the tweet got a lot of engagement. So I'm like, okay, now I need to do something with this tweet. Or I can't just let this be a happy hour that I just invite them to for my job. So then I launched a texting community where every Monday I text about 400 people about all the upcoming events happening in Miami. Like related to Web3, but now I've actually made it a little bit more broad since like the Web3 event scene has gone down a bit. And to complement the value that I was giving the people that requested it on Twitter, I started hosting dinners every month as a way to connect people in person. So since I once I combined the two, I was able to create a sense of like community amongst the members. Um, but also, I just keep it very simple, right? Texting community and dinners. So when you're starting a community, it's really easy to be excited and like, oh, you get this perk, you do this, you do that. Like that just makes it a little bit more complicated, especially if you don't know exactly who your target community is. Um, but once you listen and you deliver that value, then you can get creative with your offerings.
So step one, if I'm trying to start a community, would just be create a list of SMS lists, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you want to figure out why you're creating the community in the first place. So sometimes I actually tell people like you should just join an active community first and see who's part of it and what their needs are, but also become the best community member in that community because you might not need to start your own community. You might actually find more value from being like a superstar in someone else's community.
So for the brands listening, because a lot of the people listening will be like e-commerce marketers, founders,
Hmm.
they want to create a community around their product. Where would they start?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I would recommend starting in one, joining an existing community where they feel like their target audience is. Two, identifying their target audience. So that goes down to the theory of micro communities. Um, who are we attracting? Why are they coming to our community? What needs are we filling? And once you answer those three questions, you're able to create a mission statement. That mission statement should be the only thing driving any decisions or any actions you take moving forward. And once you have those three or those yeah, like those three things in place, then you can launch the community or start like doing some active outreach.
Yeah, I feel like when I talk to brands about community, I don't think they do that. So I hope we can. That I feel like that's a great clip just to share with brands right there, because I feel like one of the problems with community, or let's just call it loyalty programs, because loyalty programs I think is sort of an offshoot of community, is that they don't spend the time to think about why they're starting it. They don't spend the
Hmm.
time to think about like um, what is that, going back to the Nike example. Nike knows who they are. They know the values that they want to instill. They know the lifestyle, the experience. They understand what their customers want, and they build
Hmm.
that community around that. And I think if you just started off by saying, hey, we're launching a community, join our SMS list, but you have no idea what that community stands for, you have no idea the end goal of it, that I think
Hmm.
is a huge missed opportunity, and it can turn people away because nobody wants to join another SMS list for no
Yeah,
reason.
yeah, exactly. And I like what you said about Nike. And like the more I think about it, you can have micro communities within a brand, right? And that actually might push your brand forward a little bit more. So the way Nike does it is they'll have micro communities, which could be the word micro can be a very loose term, but around like soccer players. I know you play lacrosse players. And if you get more specific, you can do soccer lacrosse players that play a college sport. And then you can even do it more specific and say college players that play lacrosse and
Finance
live
bros.
in the Northeast, or yeah, or study finance. So yeah, there's micro communities working at the same time, and then you have like the football influencers that are wearing Nike outside, right? All of these like micro nodes are working at the same time. So then, if you actually realize it, it's like everywhere you look, it's Nike, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, there's this. A lot of the times in this podcast, we've talked about there's power in making your product feel like it was made just for you. And I remember there was a time where I had
Hmm.
said there's power in making experiences feel like they were made just for you. And I feel like that extends to community. So, like, if I join a community, there should be a place that feels like it was made just for me. And so I think that's really interesting because it kind of ties everything together: the product, the experience, the community. There needs to be an element of like, hey, this seat at our table, which is our community, for you it's the chain dinner, right? This seat was made for you. It was intentional. We knew you, people like you, would come sit here, and we knew that when you did sit here that you would enjoy the kind of culture and community that we've built around you.
Right, right. No, yeah, I think I like what you said about like creating like custom experiences. Um, Especially if we're talking, because like community is different if you're B2C, business to consumer, which would be like for brands, or like it's different when there's like an influencer starting their own community. Like let's say they had a newsletter that got very popular and they ended up like, hey, I'm actually launching a Slack channel. I'm giving this offering. So that's a little bit different because you understand the value. But I believe that with brands, community is very emotional as well, right?
Mm,
Like, what will make your community? Why are they going to be? Why should they be loyal to you? Like, what emotions are you activating? What value? How are you making them feel with being part of the community? That's another thing why I suggest micro communities, especially when you're starting off, because you're able to focus a little bit more and build those relationships before you actually scale. And it's a lot of like, to be honest, it's a lot of touch points, right? Like sending thank you messages or hey, how'd you like the product or have you met this person? Like it honestly adds up. I actually have a checklist of things that I do on a weekly basis when I'm just maintaining my relationships. Um, so yeah, it's really important to like make people feel like you're like the only one there.
I'm a brand and I hear micro communities. Sounds great. I believe in what you're saying, but maybe I think, man, that's a lot of work for such little payoff. What would you say to those people?
So, and I know I know your product a little bit more. So let's say if you're working with providing a solution for community leaders, right? So community leaders, let's say they have community members from 200 people to 30,000 people, right? So I don't know how big the communities you work with. So, what if I told you you're taking care of like you're building community around community leaders, and with this community, they're like, oh my God, Jared has done so much for us. Like, he has brought so much value. He's connecting us with all these other people that had the same problems as us that we didn't know had the same problems. And he's giving us rewards and he's creating a forum for us to connect. Like, how can we support Jared? Right. So, that's why it's important to focus on that target audience that might deliver you the most value. Um, and like, let's say if you're an e-commerce store, right? So with e-commerce stores, it's a little bit different because you're directly selling a product and like you're creating a funnel with the end goal, which is to like really for them to buy your product. So the community might look a little bit different than what your community might look like. So, for example, with an e-commerce brand, a lot of their community would live on social media because that's kind of probably where their leads come from. So, finding out ways to like create a sense of community on that platform that they're mostly on. But let's say if you're like selling on Amazon, right? So it's like how like let's say if we want more people to leave reviews, how are we going to incentivize people to leave more reviews? Are we going to give them a $5 off coupon? Are we going to reach out to them like, hey, thank you so much for doing this? So that might be a little bit more of like a looser community than what you would create where you're like, okay, I'm creating a very tight knit community because I know that if I focus on this, the long term reward is greater. Did that make sense? Because I feel like I just like kind of bounce off from e-commerce to you.
Yeah, I think maybe it would be good to clarify. So for e-commerce, because most of the people listening will be selling some sort of product, so I want to stay there for a second. Um,
Hmm.
I think the one of the things that I hear, because we work primarily with e-commerce companies, is they want to have community, they want to create loyalty. They hear podcasts like this where you say, smaller is sometimes better, but at the end of the day, they're driven by numbers. So I was wondering if
Hmm.
you had any thoughts on that, and advice on that to them to not look at it as simply like a numbers game when it comes to something like community.
Yeah. So I was kind of mentioning it's a little bit different because yeah, you are like the whole goal for that is to like get people to buy the product. It also depends on how often people would buy the product, right? So if it's like, like pre-workout, then you might want people to like you might want to create like a referral system or really nurture those relationships. But if you want people to buy a one-off product, then building a community might not be like your best approach, but creating a really awesome experience might be the best approach, right? So it's like finding out who the target audience is and solving whatever problem that they're facing or adding value however you can.
Yeah, I think to your point, right? Like I think in e-commerce you have different products. I think actually community and you called it experience. I think those are similar, right? You can tie in similar things. So if you're selling a motorized scooter, this was a problem that I realized at Clavio, where you're only getting one purchase. They're buying a motorized scooter once every probably if it's a good product once in their lifetime. So then the
Mm,
question is, what is the value to that customer anymore after they buy? And I think a lot of brands made the mistake in thinking, hey, this person bought a scooter or a mattress, like we're done, let's move on to the next one. The reality is someone like Razor, for example, I've only ever owned one Razor scooter as a kid, but Razor was so much about the experience, about what it meant to own a Razor, about taking your Razor to the parks and trying to like fit in with the skateboarders and being like in your own lane, like snowboarder versus skiing. I think there's so much experience to Razer that goes beyond just their product, and there's ways that brands can monetize that experience. So I think I almost would push back and say like, hey, if you don't have a way to capture additional revenue from a customer, you need to. And
mhm.
if that looks like a community element or an experience element, do it, because we know how hard it is to find new customers. So why would you not say, hey, we've got people that love our motorized scooters. What can we do to unlock additional experiences? What can we do to bring those people together? And how can we potentially monetize that, whether it's through an ambassador program, through referrals, through people
Mhm.
posting user generated content on the internet? I think that's where brands can really let community run, in a sense that maybe they traditionally wouldn't think about it that way, because like you said, they're so focused on sale 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, this is when a new theory comes in where it's like I think some brands haven't capitalized on existing communities, right? So like going back to the Razor part, it's like should Razor start their own community or should they partner with an existing community that has your target audience, right? So it's like let's just say like skate event today brought to you by Razor, right? And you know the 50 to 100 people that are going there might purchase a Razor scooter in the future or a scooter and they might purchase Razor because you've sponsored their event, you've created an experience for them. So I feel like that's something that I am really pushing forward is like how can we just partner with other brands and they already have their target audience there and they actually might have like less work on their plate because to be honest as community managers always make sure to provide our sponsors value, right? Because we're trying to build long-term relationships not only with our community members but with potential sponsors.
Yeah, and maybe there's an opportunity if you're a brand, you don't have a community, maybe as step 1A, like you said, join a community, but partner with a community. Find a community that like aligns closely with your values, bring your product to them in a unique way, um, and then get a sense of like, okay, now I see it. I see how it's lived. I
Mm,
see how people are adapting to it, and then starting your own. So I think that's actually really cool. I think that more brands should do that, because I think brands are selfish, and I think natively, like as a founder myself, like my first reaction to partnerships is always like, what's in it for me? Um, and I think that long-term value, right? Your approach should be, how can I bring value to a partner, knowing that in the long term, that will ultimately benefit my brand, and that can be applied to something like partnering with an existing community, bringing your brand to that community and building those relationships, in the hopes that one day you're the one running that community, or at least maybe that becomes sort of, you tie in with that community permanently, you form that partnership.
yeah, yeah, I love that.
What's what's something that like what's an example of a community that did it the wrong way? Like, do you have any just like horror stories of communities?
That's a good question. I have to think about this more. I also don't want to throw anyone under the bus. um, but I mean, yeah, I feel like I don't want to like bring up crypto communities and we're already going through a hard time, but what happened a lot that I saw was people didn't realize that when you let's say you're launching an NFT project, right? And you buy an NFT and you join the community, right? You buy the NFT for like $100 and then you sell 20,000, right? So you do make some good money up front, but like that community is forever. Like they just now you have to deliver to this group of people like indefinitely. and that's
Mm.
exhausting, right? There's a thing called community fatigue for community managers. I went through it, and it's hard because like imagine you're not just like now that you've already like sold your product, now you're stuck with like answering the needs of all these crazy internet people that expect so much from you. And then not just that, you end up like making them upset because let's say if like the price of their initial purchase goes down, right? So dealing with that. So I feel like, and that's kind of how I got the idea of micro communities because I saw that happen a lot. I saw communities that were sold out but only had like 100 active members, and I also saw like a lot of communities kind of just closing down. Like, hey guys, sorry, we didn't think this through. So just like being very mindful of like the numbers part of it, and also it's like yeah, like your end goal, like community is a process, right? It takes about 6 months to build a relationship with somebody, and it takes about 6 months to build like a strong community. So figuring like that's why I say it's like very intentional, and you have to be very patient because I'm still patient with all my communities because I know it's like okay, if I'm being consistent and I'm providing value, then I will attract the people that I want to my community that will ultimately purchase my product 6 months from now.
Yeah, I was talking to a buddy of mine on his podcast yesterday about this idea that like creator-led brands have had a ton of success. I'm thinking of like Mr. Beast and
Hmm.
some of these big audience brands. And the reality is like it doesn't matter what they sell, to be honest. Like usually they're selling a knockoff of something that's like rebranded from Alibaba. And that's not even like shade at all. It's just that's the reality of what they're doing. But they're having success because they started with community and then they moved
Hmm.
towards, monetization of that community. I feel like there's a lesson to learn for e-commerce brands who start with the product, of, hey, if this is something you put time into, if you invest in your customers, if you create a sense of belonging to not just the product, but the brand itself, you can launch new things. You can adapt. You can, if maybe one day I know this is a bad example because NFTs aren't physical, but like maybe one day, like this year, like NFTs just disappear. It's like if people love your brand, it doesn't matter what you sell. You could sell them plushie toys. And there's some
Hmm.
NFT projects that have done that. But let's take the example of people selling, I don't know, what's something that's gone out of style recently? COVID masks. That's not a good example. What's a good example of a product that's like no longer popular?
Mm, I would say, okay, this is so random. I can't even just came to my mind, but like grippers, remember grippers for pencils? Are those out
Oh
of style?
yeah, around the pencils. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Which honestly, I could see like a pretty passionate community of those folks still being around. Um,
Hmm.
but okay, let's take that as an example, right? There was a phase, bunch of people bought them. It's a missed opportunity to not capture that, harness that, tell a story, get people involved. Not every brand can do it. I think that's the distinction I want to make. Obviously, you know, sometimes a product is not fit for building kind of a community around, but I would push back on a lot of products that say they don't have that ability to do that, because
Hmm.
every product has a story. There's a founder behind every product that's created has a function, and that function has an experience tied to it, and you can create community around experience. But I think that brands can learn from that of saying, hey, the product we sell today, that's our bread and butter, but like it might not always be like that. We're going to need to shift. We're going to need to adapt. Why don't we focus a little bit on, hey, building up this like community or this like high value customer base that is willing to help us shape, to pivot, to transition. So when we launch a new product, we immediately have a baked in audience of people that will buy our stuff. Just like if Mr. Beast launches pencil sharpeners, they'll sell out. I think that there's
Yeah.
a lesson probably to be learned from brands in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And like I'm curious like about you. I know you run a company. Um, have you thought about community in your strategy?
I have. It's funny because I talk about it all the time. We don't necessarily have like a great community strategy, I think, because I'm so heads down helping our customers build their like programs
Hmm.
that I sometimes forget like, oh wow, we should be doing something like that. So I think I want to be doing it. I think it's definitely hypocritical of me to tell my customers like, hey, you need to be doing this and we're not doing it. Um,
Hmm.
but I think at the same time, for me, my number one objective at Nifty Bridge right now is we're in this phase of like we found customers that have a ton of value, and now we need to really push go and tell our story and build a product that people will feel pain when we replace it. And so my priorities are on like doing that right now. And I think once we continue to like really flesh out product market fit and get that offering where it needs to be, then I want to invite people on the ride, as opposed to
Hmm.
inviting people on the ride before we've really built a product that's so irreplaceable that like when I take it out of your company, you're like, whoa, 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 like everything's broken. Right. So I think that's just candidly
Hmm.
where we're at as a company. But I absolutely want to be doing more. I've enjoyed getting to work with you guys because I feel like there's so much opportunity for our technology to be useful for a lot of different people. And I feel like that's the best form of partnership, is when we have technology and we can partner with people that have use for it and we can build those relationships. So I really want to be doing more of it, basically, the long way of saying, covering my butt there. But
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it's not easy, especially if you're like heads down trying to build a product. But even for you, Jared, it's like, all right, you already have people using your product. Like, how are you leveraging that target audience that you've naturally created to make your product better, but
mm,
ultimately create these one-on-one relationships for when you are ready to start your community, right? Because everybody wants to give feedback. Like, everyone loves to be like, hey, what do you think? Like, did you like this? Like, what product or what would you like me to change? Like just taking the time to ask your customers those questions, like it'll make them feel a little bit more heard. And that's how you build the relationships for when you're ready.
yeah, I think too, I think I've probably really, this podcast, I think, has been the first step of community. So when I met with Jake, who runs this podcast, it started to click to me that this could become the beginnings of a community. So like every single person I have
Hmm.
on here, I now have a personal relationship with. And I think
Hmm.
that the podcast has been amazing at making authentic connection happen, where we can sit down, we can talk about, really interesting topics, and then me and you can continue to develop that friendship as we go and find value for each other. So I think the podcast actually has been really amazing at starting kind of the grassroots of what I hope to become, a Nifty Bridge led community in the future. And so maybe that's a good idea
Yeah.
for anybody out there too. Start a podcast, and have customers on. That's what we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And even just like proactively connecting people like, hey, this person was on this podcast and I feel like that'd be a good connection for you. Like, just be proactive about your relationships, and that actually could naturally create your community for you.
Yeah, that's so good. Um, Here's a question that I have. So community, you even mentioned it. It's kind of a buzzword.
Hmm.
Why do you think? Because I don't remember community being as big 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe it was because of uh, the crypto craze. But I still think community is super popular to talk about today. Why now? Why do you think? Why do you think now is such a big deal?
Yeah. So there's like a few things, right? Like, one, it's like, if you even think about it, thousands of years ago, like we would travel in packs. Like we had communities of like-minded people or families that we would migrate with. So I feel like naturally we gravitate towards community, whether it's like, pickleball league that you're part of every week, or let's say if you're, going to a church, like you're part of that community, right? So I feel like people are starting to understand the power of community. Like, although we have access to social media and so many other things, like nothing really beats like one-to-one connections and like word of mouth. So I think brands are starting to pick up on that, and there's been a few really good examples, right? So during COVID, Peloton, um, they have a great product, so it's easier for them to build, and they have great instructors, so it's easier for them to build a strong community around the value that they're already providing. And that was a pivotal moment for the fitness industry. Like, holy crap, like we all need to start finding ways to create that community sense. Because like when you meet someone that has a Peloton bike, you're like, oh my God, so do I. Have you tried this person out? You know? So that's like a feeling that they've created, but also people have been building communities. It just hasn't been called communities, right?
Mm,
Because communities like is a mix of like partnerships and events and marketing and sales and social media, right? So that falls all under the community bucket, but now it's there's becoming more talks about it, especially yes, especially because of crypto. Um, unfortunately, like I've been to a few I've been to a few community conferences, and there is a conference where, or like there are conferences where there's a lot of like community managers that are like not related to crypto, and there's crypto community managers, and there was a lot of just silos created because like non-crypto community managers have been building communities for decades and haven't even like sold an NFT or a badge to get into the community. They've just been focused on creating value for their target audience. Whereas crypto communities are driven by you buy first and then I create value. So I think that NFTs brought communities to life or a little bit more awareness to that. But brands are starting to realize like, okay, like this is my target audience and how can we create experiences for the
mm,
target audience to separate us from other brands?
totally. Shoot, I had oh, you know what I was gonna say is, I had this thought just now where I feel like human connection is more important than ever now. Because I feel like COVID kind of took a lot of that away. It kind of separated us, as a society, as a people. I think social media has actually separated us in that way, where we're close to everything, but now we're far from everything, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like the thing that's the most valuable, because I just feel like people today are just longing for connection. Like they're longing for someone that thinks the way they do, understands the way they do, is sad about the same things they're sad about. Whatever it is, I think people now more than ever have a sort of sense of longing to have more of that connection, because I don't think there's a lot of it happening. And I think that's a product of like the digital world we live in, the swipe culture we live in, the, constantly being inundated with, all over the place. If you can break through that noise with the
Mm-hmm.
human touch or the human connection, I think that's powerful. And I think that's what people are now realizing is working is I have a customer that is, lack of a better term, brainwashed with everything that's happening. And the way I
Mm-hmm.
reach them is by shaking their hand, which I think is pretty powerful. And I think brands are really starting to unlock that potential.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's also important to remember. And like, this is something that took me some time. It's like, community is not for everyone, right? So it's like, although you have very loyal customers or customers that use your product over and over again, they might not want to be part of the community, right? Because they might have a community elsewhere. Maybe it's not
Hmm.
work related. So when you figure out like what your like who your target audience is, it's important to know, do they want to be part of a community? If not, then there's no point in like forcing it because I feel like that
Hmm.
happens a lot because of the buzzword community.
Yeah, for us at Nifty Bridge, I think sometimes we get looped into community tool or community like platform or loyalty platform. I don't like any of those terms because I think they're not what we're about. I think what we're about is, and we've said this and I've said this, but it's about the experience side. It's about the connection side. And connection can look like community, but it can also look like, a partnership.
Hmm.
It could look like, an exclusive product that was made just for you. So I think for me at Nifty Bridge, and like my whole goal for Nifty Bridge was to bridge people, things, products, people to people, brand to customer, brand to brand. Like I want to build, I don't want to say bridges, that's so corny, but I want to build connections. I want to build connections between people. And I think that those connections don't have to be community. They don't have to be partnerships, but they're little moments where you reach out and you grab your customer's hand and you take them on a journey, and whatever that journey looks like, it brings them value, and it brings value. It brings sort of this like experience to the product they're selling. And that's what I'm really passionate about. I think that's why I get excited about what we're doing, because it's beyond loyalty. It's beyond
Mhm.
community. And in the future, I just see as people continue to move more online, I think that those digital experiences, so we've kind of talked about in person, but I think those digital experiences, those digital collaborations, those digital connections are going to become even more important.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's about meeting your people where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Amazing. Well, we're coming up on time. I like to leave sort of the end of the podcast for you if you have any kind of advice. So brands out there, maybe there's some community managers listening in, maybe there's some e-commerce marketers that want to like start exploring this idea. What would your advice be to people listening in who are hearing this and they're saying, great, like I'm ready to go. What do I do? I know you mentioned a little bit about joining a community, but are there resources that they can go to? And then maybe tactically, like if there's a great way to kind of build that, would love to have you kind of speak directly to them.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely like join a community that you're passionate, excited about, and like just really understand the emotions that they're creating while you're going back, like the value you want when you go to these communities, and that way you can start understanding the fundamentals of building one. Building communities like transparently takes a lot of work. Um, so I would really, really think about how much time you have to this and whether it makes sense for you to start a community and like what value would actually be providing your brand. Because that like I don't think that everyone should have a community. Um, and there's a lot of resources out there. So one of my favorite ones is CMX. So there's David Spinks, he's like the community guru. You can find him on Twitter. He has a newsletter. He started CMX, a community for community managers. And since then, they've hosted conferences. They've had a podcast. They have a newsletter. They have blogs. So maybe think like check that out right before you start one, or if you are starting one. Um, and then just like best practices tips if you are starting one, it's create a really simple mission statement and make sure everybody knows what that mission statement is and that that vision is very clear. And then use that vision statement to guide all of your actions. So if you want to create or you have an idea to provide more value, if it doesn't align with your mission statement, try to like stay away from that. Um, and then constantly be asking for feedback like, hey, do you want to use this forum? Do you want to meet once a month? Should our community just be a newsletter where we highlight your wins? Would that bring you value?
Mm.
Right. So you don't have to be doing too much. Just be really good at one thing. And know who your community is for. And it's not going to be for everybody. And that might suck. And that might make you feel bad, but it's just part of the community process. But yeah, I could talk about community all day. So sometimes I just don't know when to stop.
No, that's good. And that's also the name of the podcast, Magnetic. I feel like I've said this a ton of times, but that's the idea that I wanted to capture was magnets are oppositely charged. So I feel like community is the same way. Like if you're not pushing people away, you're not drawing people close. And I think that
Mhm.
that's a really cool element of community. Last thing is, where can people find you, see what you're up to? Where's the best place to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter. So my handle is LA underscore Monty Rojas. No, wait, LA Monty Rojas. It means la in Spanish. So it's not like I'm in LA. But yeah, that's basically the best way, and I try to respond to all DMs.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for joining us. This has been super exciting and also insightful for me. So we really appreciate your time and excited to see some of the clips that come out of it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.